Welcome to Feel Good From Within. I'm Yvette Blowitz, your host. Today's guest is Emma Maidment, who is a wellbeing expert, podcast host, yoga and meditation teacher, and author. In Find Your Flow, Emma Maidment shares how to live your passions and embody a life of flow. I'm really grateful you are choosing to listen into this podcast episode. I hope this conversation allows you to learn, develop, and grow. Hi everyone, it's Yvette Blowitz from SPAITGIRL.com and welcome to Feel Good From Within. I'm super excited to be here with you today and with our very special guest, Emma Maidment, who is the author of Find Your Flow. Emma, welcome to the podcast show. How are you today?
Thank you so much for having me. I have to apologize to everyone listening. I am a little bit run down after my Melbourne leg of the book tour. I do apologize if I'm a little bit nasally and stuffed up, but other than that, I am excited to be here and really well.
Thank you so much, Emma. I got the opportunity to read your book. Big shout out to Affirm Press here in Australia, who have brought this book to the rest of the world and Australia with your help. Before we dive into your book, are you happy to let our audience know a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Emma Maidment. I am a mama of two. I have two little boys. They are 3 and 10 months old. And I have been teaching yoga and meditation for over 11 years now, all around Australia and the world. Prior to that, I had a more corporate career in public relations and kind of threw caution to the wind a little bit to follow my flow. A decade later, here I am. I do a lot of writing for media on health and wellness, do a lot of speaking on all of that, and I spend most of my days playing Play-Doh with my children, if I'm honest.
I love that. And Emma, in your book, you touched on your career change. You honestly thought you wanted to be in public relations, run your own agency, and that to be your career forever. What was the moment that you decided that PR, public relations, wasn't for you and that you wanted to become a yoga teacher?
I think we're always being guided on these paths of what is it that we're here to do, to be of service to other people, to be of service to, the evolution of the universe, of consciousness, all those bigger, higher things. And we can get, I think, really caught up in that needing to be what we do in terms of our job or our career. So I just want to preface this by saying, this is not a story of you have to go and quit your job in order to find your flow. But that for me, the way I was working was totally out of alignment. I started my career actually wanted to be a journalist. I always really loved writing and all that. And then the journalism industry started to change as I was finishing high school and I could kind of see what was playing out, thank goodness. And met these girls. I was interning at a fashion week where I grew up in Newcastle and they were doing this thing called public relations. And I was like, that sounds cool. What do you do? And they're like, oh, it's kind of like journalism, but a bit more behind the scenes. And they just kind of pitched it to me. And I was like, that sounds cool. Looked up a degree, found one in Melbourne, was like, yep, cool. I'm doing that. That sounds great. And then I was watching Sex and the City and I was like, oh, Samantha works in PR. I'm just going to be like Samantha. Like, this sounds like a great glamorous lifestyle. Started studying that and then kind of got stuck in this loop of what you should do, right? So started studying it, realized, I actually don't really want to work in an agency. It doesn't light me up. I'd done a lot of internships. I was very, very type A. And so I was like interning from the day that I started my degree. And I'm like, oh gosh, I actually don't know if I want to work in an agency. What are my other options? Right from the get-go, I kind of knew that it wasn't for me, but I was in it. And it was like, well, you've got this opportunity. You got into this program. You should complete it. So I kind of kept going down that trajectory for a while. And, I was enjoying the study, but I was mostly just enjoying partying at uni, like it wasn't, it wasn't like it was an overly challenging degree. I kind of was like, yep, cool. I'll become a CEO by the time I'm 25. I'm going to work in an in-house role. I'm going to be this, corporate career person. And then in the background of all of this, my health just kept deteriorating. I went traveling every uni holiday, every chance I could get. I was overseas and I had a very nasty encounter with what I now know was a parasite and a bacterial infection. But at the time, went undiagnosed and I ended up in and out of hospital. I was being intravenously injected with antibiotics. I weighed about 42 kilos. My hair had fallen out. I was covered in cystic acne. I was an absolute mess, but I was still pushing my career. And to finish my degree, I was like, nope, this is what I'm doing. And so I sort of normalized being in this total state of survival. Like, I think I have a bit of a cold now and I don't feel great. I was a hot mess back then. Like, it was an absolute disaster. And my body was trying to say to me, hey, the way you're living and this whole lifestyle, it's not in alignment. But I was like, no, ignore that. It's just physical symptoms. I'm keeping on this trajectory. And so I kind of kept the two going. And it felt like I was living almost these two parallel lives, because the illness and the physical symptoms led me into more yoga and more alternative healing modalities. And I could kind of feel the charm, feel this pull towards them. But I'm like, yep, cool. Like, that's good. I'll just keep kind of hippie M going in the background and keep pursuing this corporate pursuit. And so I finished my degree. I finally got answers into diagnosis of this parasite infection, this bacterial infection that had literally destroyed my gut, and started working in my role. And so I was determined not to work in an agency, because I was like, nope, that's the career path everyone has to go on. I'm going to be different. So I got an in-house role from the beginning, and it was like tick the box dream job in every essence. If you had have looked from the outside, you would have gone, this chick's killing it. Like, she's gotten this amazing role in this up and coming company, and she's traveling with work, and she's doing all these things. Like, it was tick, 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 amazing. But on the inside, I was so anxious. My health was not great. And I couldn't shake this feeling that I was just, something wasn't right. I was a few years now into kind of trying to heal my gut. I found out about the parasites. I'd kind of gone on this gut healing journey. And I remember sitting in a naturopath's office. I was probably about 12, 18 months into my new role. I said to her, I'm like, look, I'm doing all the gut things and it's definitely gotten better, but I'm still covered in this cystic acne and it's just really not great. It's such an awful feeling to look in the mirror and just hate what is looking back at you. And I was obviously piling the makeup on and trying to cover it up, but there's only so much you can do when your face looks like, a pizza crater. She said, Emma, do you think that you might be stressed? And I was like basically shaking from adrenaline, and I could hear my phone going ping, 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 ping from all the Twitter notifications and emails, because my job was very, very fast paced. And I was like, no, I'm not stressed. I do yoga. And she was just like, She just kind of gave me this like knowing, yep, knowing nod, and then said like, okay, let's check your hormones. And of course, like my hormone levels were out of control, and that was what was causing the acne and, et cetera, et cetera. But that question of could you be stressed just planted a little seed. And I remember thinking to myself, who the hell does this woman think I am? I've paid her hundreds and hundreds of dollars. I've taken all the disgusting herbal mixtures that she's given me, and she's telling me that I might be a bit stressed, and that's my issue? Like, far out, lady. I just remember being on such a high horse about it. But because I had been going to yoga, it had been calling, it was the one thing that I could physically do because I was pretty unwell to do other things. And there was something about this practice that just kept calling me back. And even though I would eye roll my way through Shavasana, every time they do a meditation, I'd be like, oh God, why are we wasting time sitting? I didn't come here to sit. I do that all day. Like, come on, get on with the class. Like, I was that person in the yoga room, which is so ironic now that I have been a yoga teacher for a decade. So I get it. I see you. If you're sitting there eye rolling in the meditation part, I see you. So it was there. And so when she mentioned stress, it was like it unlocked something, and I started listening to the yoga teachers, and they were obviously talking about the nervous system and stress and these kinds of things. And it led me down a bit of a Google wormhole. And I was like, stress is actually a very massive factor in our health and in disease. And, this is over 10 years ago. So it's much more prevalent now, the impact of stress, but back then it was kind of the up and coming realization of, we're all in this state of fight or flight 24/7. So I kind of realized that and thought, all right, this is the missing piece to this healing journey. I actually really need to surrender to the meditation. I need to learn a technique. I need to uncover ways to manage stress. And once I did that, it was like the floodgates opened. It was like all these things that were inside of me trying to guide me into alignment were like, finally, your nervous system is settled enough that we can actually start to lead you towards some aligned action. And so that saw me then leaving my public relations job and kind of pursuing a life of traveling and teaching, living all over the world.
Well, that's such an impressive story. You've found great peace in slowing down, doing a role or a career that isn't about being fast-paced, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, but instead quite the opposite, slowing down, being mindful, going with the flow, taking your time, becoming aware. I want to ask you now, what inspired you to want to write your book?
So I'd always wanted to write many books. Like, as I said, I wanted to study journalism. Writing was something that had just always been a part of what I loved to do and how I like to express myself. And so over the last 11 years, I transitioned into, working freelance. So I did a lot of consulting for health and wellness businesses. I was running yoga retreats and meditation courses and teaching yoga at studios and workshops and festivals and all of those kinds of things. That path very much opened me up to then being able to travel and learn from, really incredible teachers and great masters of these ancient tools and techniques. Yoga, meditation, all of this knowledge isn't new. It might be approached in a new way, or we might have a new research paper about its effectiveness, but it is all ancient wisdom that has been around forever. It's within us as well. We've just kind of forgotten. We get stuck in the loop of the mind. The inspiration behind the book was basically putting everything that I've learned and have been teaching for the last decade onto pages so that it was super accessible to people. Because I think that there's often a block of, oh, I don't have the money to invest in doing that self-development course, or I don't have the time to learn this technique, whatever it is. A book makes it just so accessible for someone to go, okay, I can sit down in small windows of time. A book takes people on a journey of not only my story, but it's really woven with different wisdom from the yogic tradition, from the Vedic tradition throughout that. And then each chapter has an exercise. So the idea being is that come and read this book and basically go on a little mini self-development retreat, being able to sit with yourself, being able to reflect and being guided through that process, which is what I do with my mentoring and everything that I do nowadays. But obviously I also have 2 small children. This season of life, it is not realistic for me to travel and teach and share in the way that I used to. So another big inspiring factor from the book was like, this is a way that I can reach a lot of people with work that I feel is really important for people to know and to sit with and to learn from, but in a way that I can reach lots of people without having to physically be there teaching them in person. And I also think that, so much of this stuff is about having someone ask you the right questions. And there's a lot of questions in this book that you're just asked to ask yourself, to sit with. I think that's really, really powerful. We're not presenting this book as like, this is the only way to find a life in flow and alignment and to thrive. I'm asking you questions continually so that you can find your own flow. And that is my intention with this book. It's not to say you have to do everything I do and follow my exact journey in order for you to have the same outcome. I'm very intentional with leading people back to themselves so that they find their own version of that. So it's not just you end up doing exactly what I do. It might look similar, or it might be that you interpret that completely different based on your own life. But the intention behind it was to help guide everyone back home to that own internal flow, because I really feel like when everyone's living in that space of alignment, then we're in alignment with nature. Then it filters out into our entire world. It's like you want to change the world, you start with yourself and allow that kind of domino effect to come through. So that was my inspiration behind the book.
That is such a beautiful inspiration behind your book. And I want to congratulate you on your book, Find Your Flow. I'm holding it up at the moment. The cover's gorgeous. We're both holding it up. You can go to my YouTube channel, Yvette Blowitz, SPAITGIRL, to check it out. It's got a beautiful reflection on it. The book, I have to say, was super easy to read, which I love. I love when books are easy to read. I also loved, like you mentioned, how there are exercises in the book, questions. It's very reflective. Your story starts quite hilarious. I don't want to tell people, but it has to do with your gut health. I will leave it at that. You've done an incredible job. You were actually expecting your second child whilst writing this book. How important was it to have that support around you when you're writing your book?
The opportunity, I got the book deal offer right towards the start of my final trimester. And there was obviously, that process unfolds and you look at the deadline and I was like, okay, that's after his birth. It was my second child as well. So I know what postpartum brain is like. And I was like, I don't want to write this book with a newborn baby in that early, that is just a disaster waiting to happen. I was like, okay, I've pretty much got a month to write 35,000 words. How am I going to do this? And so I kind of sat down with my partner and we mapped it out of okay, can we call in some people for support with my toddler? He was still he was 2.5. So he's still very much like, I just want mum. So that was challenging. So I did so much of this during his nap times and during his bedtimes. And I had the support of some beautiful friends that would come over and help and be with him and just support me so that I could sit down and write kind of in wakeful hours. But I guess this book and the way that it came through and in the way that it is now the book that it is today is very much a reflection of flow. Like when you are in alignment with your values, when you are in alignment with nature and what nature wants, essentially, like the bigger picture of nature, not just like the trees outside, but the universal force. You can call it the universe, God, whatever you want to call it. When you're in alignment with that, things just flow. And this book is a beautiful example of that, of like sitting down and going, how on earth am I, like my brain's like, how am I going to do this? And you start with the stories, it's going to be a disaster, I'm not going to finish it in time, I'm not going to have the words, all those stories start to come out. And then I would center myself, come back into this place of being through my meditation practice and sit down to write. And suddenly I'm like, oh, I wrote 5,000 words. I wrote 10,000 words. Oh my gosh. And then suddenly I'm like, I'm halfway through. And it was just like, it just flowed out of me. And it was such a reflection of, oh yeah, this stuff works. Like everything that I'm preaching in this book, everything that I'm talking about, it just literally, it all happened in that process of creating the book and of writing it. And then even in the editing process, all of that, it was all just really beautiful how it all just happened in its own perfect way. Yeah, it was a real reflection of this book feels really supportive. It's definitely a need for this to be out there in the world. And that's why it's kind of feeling effortless, even though there was a lot of effort and dedication. I think that's one thing we forget when it comes to flow. Like, oh yeah, you just sat down to write in the evenings and how nice. But, I was heavily pregnant. It was quite uncomfortable to sit for that amount of time. Like there was a lot of discipline involved. And I think that we forget that when we're talking about flow. We just think, oh, you just go with the flow and everything just happens. But if you think about how a river flows, if a river is flowing and the banks are collapsed, it's a disaster. Like it literally will take down trees and leave a path of destruction, because water is a very, very powerful force. But if the banks of the river are intact, that water will flow effortlessly. And so for us as humans, our banks are more of our boundaries and our rituals and the things that we do daily to help create those river banks so that our beautiful flow, our stream, can continue on its way with the least amount of resistance possible. For me, that looked like doubling down on self-care, of making sure that my nervous system was supported through the whole process, all of these things, so that I wasn't in a state of stress trying to write a book about not stress. And making sure that all of those things were in place so that this work could just flow.
I love that. When the book is ready, it just can come through. It was the divine timing, as they would say.
I knew that I was going to write a book. Like you can be intentional with your goals. Like I always knew I'm going to write many books. Like I knew that was going to happen, but I wasn't rigidly attached to the outcome and the timing of that. And I think that is the key. It's like, yes, have the goals, but move in the direction of that goal. When I first had the idea of I want to write a book 10 years ago, gosh, it would have been a different book. And look, in 10 years' time, I'll probably look back and go, oh, I would have written something totally different. Who knows? Like we're always evolving and growing. I think it's very much like having that intention and moving in the direction of that, and knowing that if it's supported, it'll just happen in the timing that it needs to happen in for the kind of bigger picture of everything that's playing out.
I love that. When the timing is right, it will be right. What is flow?
Flow state, as like a psychological term, is basically when everything else ceases to exist and you are fully present with the task at hand. So athletes often describe it when they're playing a game, they're just in total flow state. They're not thinking about anything else. It's just them and the ball. Musicians, same, total flow. I know for myself, I can read music. I played in an orchestra for many years playing the flute, and I cannot tell you how I know that the note says G, D, A, B, C, D or whatever, and how that gets from the page to my brain to my fingers, but it flows through from mastery. So when we master a task, like if you sit down to play the guitar for the very first time, you are not going to experience flow state. You are going to be thinking about, where do I put my finger? What note's this? What did the teacher say? What's the instruction? You're very much in the head. When you master something, you're able to flow with it. It's like then there's no separation between, that note and that word. It's just all flowing through you. And that's when we experience flow state. And so it's easy to say like, oh yeah, well, that's just for people that master things like being a top level athlete or being a top level musician or whatever it is. But we can experience this state of flow in every aspect of our life when we master our mind. So if we learn to understand and we have the tools to actually be able to work with what's going on inside of our heads, to be able to transcend the thoughts and experience something deeper, we're able to move and experience flow state in simple things like washing the dishes or the job that you're doing. Like I experienced total flow state writing this book. It was just this, nothing else mattered. I was just totally in the flow of that. So we can master our minds. We can master so many different aspects of our lives through, having boundaries, having discipline, having all those kinds of things. And so I kind of married that idea of flow state with the interpretation of flow being ultimately living in alignment. So the idea is that within each and every one of us, we have a path. We have something that we're here to uncover, something that we're here to contribute, to do, to experience in this lifetime. When we quieten down the noise of the mind and other people's opinions, and or we stop pushing should uphill and we come back into our heart, we live in alignment. We find that internal flow that is ultimately guiding us. And I say this in the book, that all rivers lead to the ocean. And it's so true, because within us, when we are navigating that river, it's ultimately bringing us home to that pure, indivisible consciousness, that higher realm, whatever it is that we're all here as spiritual beings having a human experience moving towards. And so to be in a state of flow is to be in alignment with that internal stream or river that's guiding you. So then you experience almost this single point of focus, in that it becomes flow state of like other people's opinions, all those kinds of things don't matter. When you're totally in flow, it doesn't always make sense to other people. It's like, I know that I need to go to this country and do this thing. And people are like, that doesn't make any logical sense, or you're not thinking about it, or whatever, because they're coming at it with their own stories and their own ideas. But you have this calling within you of like, that's what I need to do. And you follow that. It kind of blends this idea of living in flow, following that internal charm, and then experiencing flow state along the way, where you're just single point of focus, following that path, and everything else falls away. And it feels really beautiful. Like it feels like everything is then flowing in the ways that we kind of imagine flow, of like you meet the right person at the right time. You realize that life is happening through you, not to you, and that you are this beautiful vessel that consciousness is moving through, and you're just expressing that in the many different ways that we express that in our human self. And sometimes that might look like, your career, or for some people, it might be their parenting or the way they show up in community. It doesn't have to be the same thing for everyone. When we're in alignment with our own values and our own capital S self, that is when we start to experience flow.
I love that. And thinking of flow for me, definitely like you, is writing. I got to sit down the other week and just write, and it was so therapeutic. It was so amazing. I got caught in flow, and I remembered why I actually started blogging back in the day before Facebook was a big thing, was because I love to actually write and get lost in words and just be in flow. And then a couple of hours later, you're like, oh my goodness, have I been writing for that long? Whereas like everything now with social medias, you can still get caught in the flow when creating the content. But I speak to people who find their flow through cooking. When they're cooking recipes, even just at night for their family, for themselves, they're experiencing periods of flow. That's probably a good example of flow, when you're just cooking a recipe and you're in that alignment, or you're mindful of what's in front of you. You're in flow. You're not thinking about your to-do list or the bills you have to pay or whatever it might be, the stresses of the day. Being in flow or finding your flow doesn't necessarily have to mean you have to monetize your flow. You can if you like, of course. That's great. But I feel like we're living in times now that when we're using the social media apps, we're bombarded with everything you do has to be monetized. Everything you do has to be recorded. Everything you do has to be filmed and sold. Would you say there's some beauty in finding your flow that doesn't have to be monetized?
It's about what is in alignment for you. So whether it's, yes, you want to become the latest YouTube person and monetize, that way, great. That's what flows for you. I think the thing about it is not looking left or right about what other people are doing and necessarily comparing yourself or looking at that grass is always greener. It's coming back to what actually lights you up. If cooking is your thing and you love cooking, but you have no interest in going on MasterChef or starting a cooking YouTube channel or whatever, because that adds an extra layer to it. Like sometimes we just want to do things for the pure joy of doing them. And that is the point of this life and this kind of spiritual journey that we're on, is just to, the highest states of consciousness are joy and love. So experiencing that through just cooking for your family is amazing. Like that is what most people are striving to get to through going on yoga retreats and meditating and doing all these things. And you're like, I'm just cooking bolognese sauce and I'm experiencing that joy. Like that's the point of it, right? There is this kind of misconception that, you need to quit your job and go and become some kind of spiritual entrepreneur or whatever it is to be living in flow. It's actually about coming back to yourself and what is your path. Like that is the bigger question. It's not like, oh, that person became a yoga teacher, I'll become a yoga teacher. It's like, does that align with you? Does that feel right for you? Does that tick your values? Like it's really a journey of peeling back the layers of the shoulds and the ideas that you think you should do this and you should do that, or this person's doing that, or Instagram tells you this, and coming back to who you are, connecting with your capital S self and getting really clear on that. And that's what starts to lead to flow, because otherwise we're just kind of throwing spaghetti at a wall and hoping that it sticks. Or again, we're just stuck in someone else's should. And that should might look really nice. Like, yeah, I'll become a yoga teacher and meditation teacher. That's great. But you might not like the other aspects of that. Or by monetizing your bolognese sauce, you suddenly have to do a bunch of other stuff that you don't like doing, that you don't want to do, that doesn't create flow. It creates a massive amount of friction. It's really coming back to just like, who are you? What is in alignment with you? And then how are you expressing that alignment through your actions? And that's when, other job opportunities, things like that might start to come out of that. But the first step is really just, okay, let's just peel everything back and come back to you. Like, let's look at where your nervous system is at. If you are in an incredibly stressed state, you're not really in a place to make those big life decisions, because you're not making it from a place of a settled nervous system where you're connected to yourself. You're making it from a place of like, I'm really stressed and I'm just going to jump to the next thing and hope that fixes it. It's like, okay, let's fix the stress. Let's settle the nervous system. Let's get in alignment with our values, with what we actually desire, and then follow that. And who knows, you might end up monetizing the bolognese sauce, or you might just really, really enjoy experiencing flow cooking for your family. And that is just a part of your life. Like not everything we do has to be work related.
I love that. Not everything we do has to be work related. And it's interesting when you talk about flow, and even when we reflect on social media, when I was doing, say, spa blogging, which is going to a spa, experiencing a spa, generally you wear a big spa robe, your body is covered, you're in a comfy spa robe. There was a big trend that it was known back in the day that if you did lingerie and posted that on Instagram, or did bikini blogging as an example, that would get you more followers. Going back to my values, is I really value relaxation, wellness, well-being, all those nice things. And I value that I'm more than my body shape or size. I'm way more than my body. I don't need to show it off. So rocking it in a spa robe, even though it doesn't mean you'll get the million followers because you're not showing your body, but it's in alignment with what I believe. We're wanting to connect people to visit the spa so they can feel good from within, to nourish their body, mind, soul, make them feel whole. So I love your message also, because it's such a beautiful reminder of letting go of expectations, what other people are doing, and just going back to your values or what you love. And you only know that because it comes from within. And you'll definitely, like you said, if you can quieten the mind, calm the central nervous system, you can figure out through your book also, with all the questions that you have in there, which is the next question I'm going to ask you. There was a section in your book, Live Your Passion. One of the most important questions, which you've already touched on it, is finding out what lights you up. And in the book, you talk about how to find what lights you up, which I think is so important to finding then your flow.
Yeah. Yeah, it becomes about knowing yourself and having a relationship with yourself. And kind of, as you said then, like you can have the knowing, well, if I just showed some leg, I might get a bit more of an Instagram following or whatever it is. But using that as an example, are you attracting then the right people? Is it actually your tribe or whatever it is that you're trying to attract through that vibe? No, it's probably the different kind of eyes on your page that you don't really want, right? If we start living out of alignment and start doing things based on what other people tell us, or based on what the trend is or whatever, it doesn't flow for us. You might get an immediate gratification of, oh, I got 10,000 new followers because I, posted a boob shot. And then you realize those people are never going to buy or read your blog or whatever it is because you're not for them. And you spend so much time trying to outwardly please other people. And it's a big thing, like finding what actually lights you up. It's so layered, because like obviously there's cultural aspects to it. Then there's obviously your family. How are you raised? What are the belief systems you have around career and success, and the way in which you show up in community? It's so layered. And I definitely don't think that everyone should just go and quit their job and become a meditation teacher, because society would literally collapse. So we all have, like, this is a big part of this kind of topic, is in the yogic tradition, we call it dharma, which basically means your role or contribution to the evolution of the universe. We think, oh, it's my dharmic path to, do this job or start this company, but your dharma evolves in each and every moment. So it's, how are you responding to the need of the time? How are you responding to what the people around you, what you can see is a need, and your skill set goes, I can address that need. This is the way I know how to help them. For some people, they think in, say, a engineering way, and so their way of solving the problem is to go, well, I've got this great idea for this thing I can engineer that will solve this problem. Like, we're all different in that way, because we're all contributing together to create the world, society, the way in which we know it. This is where it's really about just coming back to your alignment. And I give exercises in the book about, like, coming back to what actually lights you up. Where do you feel joy? And this is a big one. I work a lot in my mentoring with a lot of mothers, because motherhood is such initiation into a whole other aspect of yourself, and we get really lost within that, and you're in so much devotion to small humans and their every single need, you could very much lose yourself in that. And so sometimes you ask, like, a mum a question of, like, what do you enjoy doing? And it's like, I actually have no idea. How are you supposed to find flow? How are you supposed to find alignment if you don't know? And so then you need to go and do the research. You need to go, okay, maybe I'm creative. I'm going to do a pottery class. I'm going to do a dance class. Whatever it is that feels charming, do the research. Like, go and experience it, and then tune in with yourself. Am I really enjoying this? Am I just in this class because my best friend's here and she looks like she's having the best time, but I don't really like it? Like, it's really about being honest with yourself. And through all the exercises in the book, at the very beginning, I say, do these exercises in a journal that you are going to burn, or that no one is ever going to read. Because even when we go down the self-development path, we're still doing it through this lens, probably because of social media, of like, if someone read this, what would they think about me? If I took a photo of my journal and posted it online, what would that say about me? And so that kind of creates this contrived way in which we're honest with ourselves about what are our interests. What do you actually like? Because it's like, oh, what will make me seem more likable by other people? Because we always want to feel that connection to community. We want to feel accepted. Like, all these things are very normal. So it's really paring it back and going, okay, what do I actually enjoy doing? What lights me up? And then, what skills do I have? What makes me unique? Because again, we think, oh, everyone can be a yoga teacher. Yeah, absolutely. You can, like, think about it, going to a yoga class. How many classes have you been to? It's the same thing, right? More or less. It's downward dog. It's a few warrior poses. It's, a shavasana at the end. It's this same little thing that people are doing. But the way in which they approach that is so different. And there'll be teachers that you go to where you're like, I freaking loved that class. I love her. She's my teacher. Like, that was epic. And then others that might teach the exact same sequence, and you're like, nah, they're not for me. Right. And so what that kind of shows you is, like, it's not necessarily about what the actual action is, it's what you bring to it. And whether it's an energetic exchange, when that person's in fully alignment with them and what they're offering, they'll attract those other people their way. Often it's a process of kind of letting go of all these ideas we have around what we should do, what we should like, or who we've been in the past. Like, you are allowed to change your mind. Like, you're allowed to go from loving making the bolognese sauce on the weekend to going, actually, I hate cooking now. I don't want to do that anymore. As change is the only constant in life. And it is so funny to me how resistant we are as humans to change. We're like, yeah, change is good. We're happy to preach it. But then when we have to actually do it ourselves, like, oh no, but I'm clinging onto this old identity or this old part of myself because it feels comfortable. And repeating that ever repeating known keeps us stuck in the same karmic loop. We just go round and round and round and round and round. And so often there's a period of distraction that has to come up. We have to go, I need to let some things go. That feels no longer relevant to me. Just because I loved knitting doesn't mean I have to love it for the rest of my life. So it's letting go of these things that don't feel relevant to who we are right now, and then exploring what feels charming. And it doesn't have to make sense. Like, you might see an ad for an African dance class and you're like, okay, I've never done that, but something about it speaks to me. I'm going to follow that charm. And who knows, it might be that you love, or you might meet someone else that leads you to something. Like, it's really just coming back to what feels charming to you. And that starts to lead you down this path of what actually lights you up. And that might lead to a total career change and whatever, or it might not. It might just lead to you adding in other things along that path, and you're happy for your current job to just kind of be the fuel for all those other activities or expressions of yourself. It really is just giving yourself permission to let things go, to let old ways of being fall away, to let go of what feels no longer relevant and come back into what feels relevant for me in this season of life. And what do I actually want to do? What do I want to experience? How do I want to feel? Start asking yourself those questions, and it starts to lead you into this alignment of like, okay, what actually lights me up and how do I want to experience that more regularly?
I love that. What actually lights me up and what I want to experience more regularly. And it's interesting when you talked about the timing, because during COVID, when it first started, I had to return from Maldives. I was doing a lot of spa travel, content, virtual travel shows before it became the norm. And I had to return back to Australia because they were shutting the borders. I remember sitting at my desk looking at the news unfolding, and I couldn't actually go anywhere because I was in quarantine in my unit. And I asked this question, how can I serve and help others? And that's when it came up. You've got a platform there, you've got a blog. I used to do written interviews back in the day. And then it was like, well, you can interview people to find out how they're coping. Like if I feel so anxious because I can't leave the unit or I can't travel, the whole world's being shut down. How can we practice self-care at home? How can we even work at home, live at home, be at home? Because it was so foreign to me, even having to stay at home. It was such a crazy period. So that's when the idea of the mental health podcast show came up. And my first actual guest, which I just recorded on my mobile phone in my kitchen, literally, was co-founder of Frank Body, Jess. I started writing about her company when they first started up. She'll definitely know how to work from home and how to keep things going. And it just evolved from there. By no means when I started the Spa blog did I ever think I'd be doing a mental health podcast show about self-help books. But it was that timing of how can I serve and help others. And then so it just grew from there of wanting to share people's self-care rituals, help those struggling in lockdown or experiencing depression or anxiety or overwhelmment. So it's interesting how you say that we do evolve, we do change. There's different seasons. So now that travel has started back up again and it's all super safe, I'm like, okay, podcast shows been put on the back burner for a little bit. And I've just been over to the Maldives doing spa travel again 4 years later. So it's interesting that got parked, travel, mental health became more of a priority, self-care and reading books. Because Emma, I could speak to you forever about your book, but I want to ask you, in your book, you talk about 4 ways to recover from stress for your mind, body, and soul. Now, I'm mindful that everyone who's listening in, especially in Australia or wherever you are around the world, because of inflation, cost of living, we are absolutely in a diabolic crisis when it comes to rental prices, even finding rentals. We've got, sadly, really awesome Aussies living in cars, mothers with children, people in tents. I'm getting goosebumps while I say this. I'm so aware of the hardships, the adversity. Even I know going to the grocery store, Emma, and you can probably relate. Also being a mom with 2 kids, a family, the cost of living is through the roof. Food, electricity, petrol, insurances, mortgages. Then we've got on top of that all of the stresses that are playing out with the wars. We've had some terrible, horrific events that have recently happened in Bondi. There's just so much going on. It's so freaking overwhelming. People are working their butts off, whether it's 1 job, 2 jobs, 3 jobs. So loads of stress. So Emma, what would be one of your go-to for helping us to recover from stress?
There's a lot going on out in the world, but one of my teachers always says there's no such thing as a stressful situation, just a stressful response. So when we are in a regulated space within our nervous system, when it's balanced, we're able to move from stress to calm effortlessly. And the goal of a regulated nervous system isn't just to be calm 24/7, but it's to be able to respond, because stress isn't necessarily bad. Sometimes we need the stress of like, there's a tiger chasing us or whatever it is. We have to think quickly. We have to run. We have to get away, whatever it is. Like there is a survival instinct that is part of that, which we need. And then what happens is because of everything you've just mentioned, we're running from a tiger. All of those things have become the tiger 24/7. And we're so reactive to another event and another this and another bill and the money and blah, 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 and it's just we're in reaction, reaction, reaction. But when we actually have techniques that bring us back into a more regulated nervous system, we can come up with a creative response. We can respond creatively to life. It doesn't mean that you sit down and write a book or paint a picture. It might be your creative response, but you're able to think more creatively around how am I going to approach that seemingly stressful event? How can I approach that from a place of love rather than a place of stress and anger and whatnot? For me, one of the easiest ways and most accessible ways is meditation. And like, obviously I'm biased because I'm a meditation teacher, but I know because I resisted it for so many years and I did everything else that I possibly could other than actually sit and meditate. My mum is a beautiful example of this. She started doing yoga when I started teaching it like over 10 years ago now. She can do crow poses and handstands and like all the things. She's amazing, but she always resisted the meditation. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago when she turned 60 that she was like, okay, I'm finally ready for you to teach me to meditate. And I taught her to meditate and she was like, this is the first time in 60 years that I've actually sat and just done nothing. I've actually just experienced being with myself, beyond thoughts, just literally no other distractions, nothing else, just in being. And I'm like, wow, that is amazing. 60 years of never, ever experiencing that. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that can relate because the story and the drama and the external stress gets us caught up in all of that. But having a meditation practice and a technique that takes you beyond the mind is a way for your mind to have a rest. Because when you go to bed at night, you're still digesting. You're still digesting the day, the news article you just read that spiked your cortisol level, like the food that you shoveled in at 10 p.m. at night that you probably shouldn't have. Like all these things are still happening in the body, and the mind needs to tell the body, you need to digest that food, digest that emotion, bury that, come back to that later, whatever it is. It's like the control center in the brain's still working when you are lying down to sleep. When you meditate, it's almost like all those guys up there in the brain just get to like have their lunch break. And so the mind actually gets to go and have a rest and rest in and experience this place of being. Teach and practice style of transcendental meditation, which takes us beyond the thought. So it's not like mindfulness where we're listening to a sound or listening to this or that. We're using a mantra, we're using a sound to go beyond the mind. So for a lot of people, that is such a welcome, I don't want to use the word escape, but break from everything else that's going on, right? Like going on to an internal spa. You know, when you're in a spa and the nice music's playing and you feel like, oh, this is just so peaceful. In that space within yourself, you're giving your nervous system an opportunity to recover from stress, to be able to do its own repair work so that when you come out of that, you're a little bit more equipped to meet the demands of life. And this is what all of these self-care practices are about. It's not necessarily just about this, oh, I went and had a massage and it solved all my problems. It's looking at what are these things that we're doing to nurture our nervous system so that we can meet the demands of life. And the demands of life, like the seesaw, is becoming very, very skewed. The demands are stacking up. And what happens when those demands stack up is people neglect the self-care thing. The meditation class, the yoga class kind of goes out the window because can't afford it, don't have the time, it's not a priority. But then what's doing is depleting the tank. Kind of demands stack up and they feel even harder to even comprehend how you're going to cope with them. But when we actually even that out and go, we need practices that help us meet those demands so that we're kind of just, able to meet them and keep this beautiful sense of stability happening rather than, trying to achieve balance, because I don't think we ever really get into a balanced state. And if you're on a balance board, you're just wobbling 24/7 and it's actually kind of stressful. But how do you create stability within that? You have stability within your mind. And having a meditation practice is a beautiful and accessible, like you can do it anywhere. When you learn a technique, you don't need a teacher. You're not reliant on all these kinds of things. You learn a technique, it's yours to practice, to keep as you kind of transverse through life, and it helps keep you regulated so that you start to learn to respond to life rather than react. And doesn't mean that life isn't still seemingly hard or there aren't things you need to overcome, but you're responding to that demand rather than just going another bill, full reaction, and just then spiraling everything else out of control. It's going, okay, this is hard right now. I can acknowledge this is hard, but also I can do hard things. I can build my resilience. Like we know how diamonds are built under pressure. We're under a lot of pressure right now, and we can either let that completely crumble us, or we meet those demands. We go, I need to look after myself. I need to nurture my nervous system. I need to look after my mind. I need to give it a break so that I can better respond, so that I can kind of sharpen and shine up that diamond, so that you come out of these trying times sparkly, as opposed to, a crumbled mess, because the demands are never going to not be there. Like, unless you renounce the world and go and live in a cave in India and meditate all day, and that has its own set of issues, you're never going to escape them. Like, the stresses, the demands of life are always going to be there. So let's find a technique. For me, it's always meditation that helps us meet those demands and commit to doing that. Do it when we don't want to, when we can't be bothered, when we feel overwhelmed, when we're too tired, whatever it is. Keep doing the practice to keep getting the benefit, so that you start responding to life rather than reacting.
I love that message, and I love your go-to. My go-to also is meditation. It's like a non-negotiable, and it must happen. It has to happen. So I'm so disciplined, hail, rain or shine, it's happening, just because I know by putting the effort in, even if it's only 10 minutes minimum a day, 15 minutes, but minimum 10, even just having that discipline, it's like I often say, having a mini holiday. And when I go a little bit longer, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, it's total bliss. I feel so much better afterwards. I honestly don't think I could survive without it. It's just such a good go-to technique, tool. And I think I've been doing it now for over 10 years, but I'm still evolving. As you mentioned, the pressures are through the roof. There's always something, though, whether you've sadly lost a loved one or one of your loved ones is ill. There's just always something going on in our lives. I do find by giving that mind a break, like a mini break, it just helps, like you mentioned, your central nervous system, your brain, your mental health, your physical health, your well-being, and you cope better with the demands of today. I love yoga. I too experience the meditation at the end, and I think that's how I sort of got into it. But it wasn't until I started doing it as a separate practice. So I'll do just meditation on its own. And yes, when I do the yoga, it's at the end, but I find just that self-care practice is so vital. So if anyone hasn't practiced meditation before and you're thinking, oh, I've heard about it, heard it's pretty good, definitely give it a go. I found that there are some meditation practices I really didn't like. They weren't for me. I think, as you've mentioned, finding your flow, you'll find what works best for you. So Emma, you're a busy mum. You now have a published book. What are some of your self-care rituals, and how do you take care of yourself?
Yes, so meditation, obviously, every day. And I'm lucky that my partner meditates as well. So we tag team in the mornings. One of us will be with the kids, the other one will be meditating, so that we have that time. I'm very lucky to have a sauna at home. If I didn't, I would never get to use one. For me, a few nights a week, being in the sauna, just having that quiet space to myself is so important. And then I really like to integrate movement into the day. So I always do like a 15-minute workout. I'll often have the kids kind of around as I'm doing that. But I think movement is really important, particularly like, yes, we want to look after the mind, but they're so linked to the mind and the body. So for me, having a movement practice is really important. And then making sure that I'm super nourished with all the food that I'm eating. Because obviously I'm breastfeeding, I'm not getting much sleep. So there's a lot of depletion on, in so many other areas of my life. So I'm really trying to stay on top of everything nutrition-wise. Yeah, making sure I'm moving in a way that nourishes my body and doesn't further deplete it. And then things like, having a sauna, meditating every day, they're my non-negotiables.
I love that. And what is your hope for your newfound book readers?
I hope that everyone who reads this book actually does the exercises in it and has an experience of coming home to themselves. Because when you do that, when you actually quieten the noise, when you come back to you, like I said before, that's how we change the world, when we're all living in alignment. So my hope is that people remember that they're not separate to nature, that they are nature, and they remember how to nurture their nature so that they can live in a state of flow.
Beautiful. I love that hope. And how can we stay in touch with you after this podcast show?
So I mostly hang out on Instagram. You can find me Emma Maidment with a little underscore. And then my business is called Flow States Collective, where we offer, different meditation courses and things like that. If you have the book, in the back of the book, you'll find there's a resources page, which actually links you to a bunch of free meditations and a free community that we're going to be doing book clubs and all sorts of fun stuff like that through as well.
Thank you so much, Emma, for spending so much time with myself and our global audience for Feel Good From Within podcast show. I totally recommend everybody grab a copy of Find Your Flow. I was actually only in Big W Australia the other day and saw it there on the shelf, but it is in all good bookstores and retailers in Australia and online. A big shout out to you, Emma, and the team at Affirm Press for bringing this book. I really, truly am super grateful for all of your words of wisdom, insights, and for helping us to find our flow. Can't wait to see everyone finding what lights them up. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye, Emma.
See ya, hun.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening into this podcast episode. I hope you found this conversation of interest and of benefit to you. In support, I would love for you to subscribe to Feel Good From Within with Yvette Blowitz on any podcast app, and to also leave a 5-star rating and a review in support too. Be sure to share the show with your family, friends, and community, and to subscribe to my mailing list at YvetteLeeBlowitz.com, and to follow SPAITGIRL, Feel Good From Within, Yvette Blowitz on any social media app. And together, let's feel good from within.